Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out on a beautiful but chilly evening in October. My name is Artemis Kirk. I'm University Librarian at Georgetown, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here this evening for the second Library Associates program, featuring the annual Casey-McIlvane Lecture. This endowed library lecture fund was established in honor of two Georgetown alumni, the late Francis L. Casey, Jr., and the Reverend Donald W. McIlvane. The fund is a joint gift of the late Roseanne McIlvane Casey from 1979 and Nancy McIlvane Del Genio, Georgetown alumna of 1982. I'd like to say a very special thank you to the members of the Casey and McIlvane families who are here this evening. Frank Casey and Doris McIlvane, if you would be kind enough to stand and acknowledge the greetings of the Tonight's program is also supported by the Georgetown Library Associates, and we welcome them and their guests to join us in greeting the speakers after this program. If you aren't yet a member of the Georgetown Library Associates, you know what you can do. See me after class. Also in our audience are members of the Georgetown University Library Board whom I'd ask to stand also to be recognized. They're in for a long meeting tomorrow, but meanwhile, they're very much looking forward to this presentation tonight. The board's time, talent, and treasure enable this library to advance the mission of a great university. Finally, join me in thanking the people from the library who make these events possible. Annie Lorenzana, Jenny Smith, Alyssa Skyrick, David Hagan, and the rest of the library staff who've put so much effort into these events. Tonight is going to be a stimulating and an exciting program, though slightly different than originally listed. We're going to hear about the revolution in higher education and about massive open online courses, the acronym for which is MOOCs. But we're also expanding the program to give you some perspective from the planning stages of a MOOC from the Kennedy Institute of Ethics at Georgetown, which will launch next spring, to the preliminary results of a just-launched MOOC from Georgetown School of Foreign Service. That MOOC is called Globalization's Winners and Losers. The overall focus this evening, therefore, is on the revolutionary concept of online learning, which is very consistent with the Jesuit tradition of teaching to the world, and with a special emphasis on the areas of strength at Georgetown: ethics and bioethics. Our speakers and our roster of speakers has expanded as well. Maggie Little, unfortunately, is not able to be with us this evening, but we're delighted to welcome Karen Storr, Professor of Philosophy and member of the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, whom some of you will remember from her brilliant associate's talk last year on manners. Kelly Hewer, postdoctoral fellow at the Kennedy Institute, and Rosa Elena O'Neill, Program Counselor for the Landiger Program in International Business Diplomacy. You can read about these three extraordinary women in the very abbreviated biographies that we've left at your places. Last December, Georgetown University joined the consortium known as edX, originated by MIT and Harvard, and now including about 25 prestigious universities around the world. We and they are experimenting with different models of teaching and learning: the traditional classroom-based, online only, and a hybrid combination of online and traditional. Through our experiments, we will gather important data about how students learn and how teachers teach, with the expectation that Georgetown's educational offerings, regardless of format, will always be at the highest intellectual levels. Now, I hope you will join me in welcoming our three speakers, Karen Storr, Kelly Hewer, and Rosie O'Neill.
Tonight, I need to hold this close, don't I? Okay, I will try. I don't like to stand behind podiums because I'm very short and I get lost, but neither do I like to stand behind microphones, so we'll see. Maybe I'll start at the podium and then wander. So thank you all for coming. I'm excited to have this chance to talk with you this evening. I'm sorry I'm not Maggie Little, who is wonderful and amazing to listen to, but I hope to be able to share some of the thoughts that we have about our MOOC and about MOOCs in general. So, as Artemis said, my name is Karen Storr. I'm a faculty member in the philosophy department here at Georgetown and also a senior research scholar in the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. And I am one of the faculty members. We're a team-based effort, a 7 faculty member and a whole lot of other people working on the Bioethics MOOC. So our course is going to be taught by 7 people. We're designing it as a group and putting it together that way. So one of the things that I think for all of us, and one of the themes about MOOCs, is that it is a giant, grand experiment. But it's an exciting one, too. When I first started thinking about MOOCs and got asked to participate in this MOOC, my first response was one of skepticism. Like, really? Do I really want to do this? I've got plenty to do on my own. This isn't really how I think about teaching. This isn't really how I think about my job. But one of the things that I've learned, if you spend enough time at a Jesuit institution, and that if people ask you long enough and hard enough in the right way, you end up just having to say yes and jumping into something that you don't know anything about. And I'm glad I did jump into this, or I think I am. So far, I'm glad that I've jumped into it. So the idea of a MOOC, something that none of us had ever heard of until a couple of years ago, and some of us may not have heard of until just about 5 minutes ago, MOOCs have sort of taken over the educational landscape in higher education. And there's a couple of sort of dominant narratives about them. One of those narratives is that MOOCs are the best thing since sliced bread in education. They're going to revolutionize it, they're going to transform it, and everything will be great. And there's another narrative about MOOCs, according to which they are the worst thing ever for higher education, that they're going to destroy it and undermine it, and basically everything is going to fall to pieces. So I kind of doubt that either of these things is going to happen, and I think anyway it's much too early to tell what MOOCs will do to the educational landscape because we just don't know yet. But one thing I think is clear, and that's that they call us to rethink what it is that institutions of higher education are, what we're for, and what our mission is. So I was really excited to hear that Georgetown had partnered with edX, which of the major MOOC providers is the only one that's a nonprofit, which is important to me. But also because I think it provides Georgetown with a chance to work together with other educational institutions to think through this enormous challenge about what higher education looks like in this new world that we're living in, and to learn from each other's experiences and ideas and successes and failures and speak together about this. But I think there's also interesting and important challenges for Georgetown as a Jesuit institution when it comes to MOOCs. And I want to say a few things about that more generally, about why Georgetown should, and maybe should not, but I think probably should, be in this world of MOOCs. And then I'm going to say some sort of broad things about some of the pedagogical opportunities and challenges that we face, and then Kelly is going to speak more specifically to the things that are coming up in our MOOC. So one of the things that I have found particularly interesting and actually very reassuring in my readings about the early Jesuits is the extent to which the very first Jesuits were educational innovators themselves. Jesuits have been making things up as they go along when it comes to education from the very beginning. So the first Jesuit school was started in 1548 in Sicily. And they rapidly expanded. A few years later, there were 30 of them, and then it just went on from there. The schools were a brand new type of school. The world was changing dramatically. There was a sense that the existing higher education systems, the schools weren't serving the needs of this new population, and people looked to those early Jesuits for something different. And they responded. They didn't know what they were doing, right? They just saw a need and they said, okay, we'll try to fill that need. And they did, and the rest is history. I want to speak a bit about that need and what that looks like today, because the needs that we face are, of course, different from what the 16th century Jesuits faced. But in other ways, perhaps they're not. So MOOCs are definitely not going to solve all the problems in higher education, particularly problems about affordability and access. But they do hold real promise for making higher education available and accessible to people who might not otherwise get it. So let me use a specific example for us. So Georgetown, along with many other Jesuit colleges and institutions, is part of something called the Jesuit Commons. And the Jesuit Commons is a collaboration of institutions that are dedicated to trying to create resources and pathways and structures to bring educational opportunities to people around the world. And within Jesuit Commons, there's a specific program called Jesuit Higher Education at the Margins. And that is a pilot program that is working with Jesuits that have a presence in 3 refugee camps in different parts of the world, one in Malawi, one in Kenya, and an urban refugee program in Syria. And the pilot program aims to bring education to people living in those camps. So as people know, individuals can end up living in refugee camps for years or even decades. And of course, it's extraordinarily important to meet their bodily needs. But as we know, there's a lot more to human dignity and human flourishing than bodily needs. And so one of the things that the Jesuits have been trying to do in those camps is provide people with access to education, not because they can use it to get a job, although they might, but just because the human spirit needs something more. And so this program and its aim is to try to create pathways for for people in those camps to receive an education, and perhaps also to help educate the rest of us about what their lives and experiences are like. So one of the things that we're hoping to do with our MOOC is to help participate in those conversations and help create some structures that might enable Georgetown to really be a leader in that movement and help us draw those connections for them. Now, not everybody who signs up for MOOCs is a refugee in a camp in Malawi, not by a long shot. Most people who sign up for, well, this is hard to generalize actually, but the people who sign up for MOOCs come from a huge range of backgrounds. But one of the things that I think is really striking about the MOOC phenomenon is just their sheer popularity. And the popularity, not just of courses where we might expect people to want access to things, skill sets that they might need for particular kinds of work, but the popularity and excitement that there is about MOOCs in less traditional online areas like the humanities and the social sciences. So as a humanist myself, I think it's incredibly exciting that tens of thousands of people have signed up to take courses on Greek heroes and modern poetry, not because they're going to get anything from it, but just because they want to. This, to me, is a testament to the value of what we're doing and the importance of it in the world. And I think the fact that there are so many people out there who are clearly hungry for this kind of intellectual stimulation, this kind of interaction, means that there's an important need out there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the needs of people in refugee camps. It could be the needs of people in our community or outside our community who want to participate in a conversation and to have that kind of intellectual exchange. And to me, this is something incredibly significant, a significant phenomenon, and one to which Georgetown, as a Jesuit institution, is in a position to respond and has moral reasons to respond to. So I think that there's a need there, and it's an important need, and it's a need that as an institution, and specifically as the Catholic Jesuit institution, Georgetown should respond. Now, having said that, there are also a lot of complexities for an institution that has a population here on campus that we're working to serve, and trying to figure out how to balance those considerations about being who we need to be to our students and their tuition-paying parents and everybody else, and having this sort of broader global presence. So I want to say something briefly about what I see as the pedagogical challenges and some of the opportunities about teaching MOOCs. So I am a traditional college teacher. I teach classes from a variety of sizes. I teach intro classes up to graduate seminars. I teach classes of 10 people up to 240 people. But I think of myself as doing the thing that college professors always do. You stand in front of people and you talk to them just like I'm doing now. So one of the things that I learned early on, when I kind of thought about, okay, we're doing a MOOC, so it's sort of like that, except bigger and with cameras. And one of the things I learned early on is it's not like that at all. That it's actually nothing like anything I've ever done before. And moreover, that it takes an awful lot more than I know how to put one on. So you can kind of think, okay, I know how to teach a class. I've been doing this for a long time. But one of the things that I've quickly learned is I actually don't know how to teach a MOOC. None of us really know how to teach a MOOC, and we're all learning together, and we need a lot of collaboration. There's the saying that everybody knows, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a very big village to put on a MOOC. And that's a wonderful thing, actually, because it's calling us to, first of all, be a little bit humble about what our level of our expertise is, and also to sort of make connections and build strengths and connections with other parts of the institution. That's kind of exciting. But the pedagogical challenges, because the MOOC is so unlike anything that certainly I've ever done before, and we're still learning, we're learning things all the time about it, that it raises a lot of really interesting challenges. So MOOC stands for Massively Open Online Course. And that M, O, and O all add important dimensions to what this experience is. And so let me work backwards. The online part is in some ways the simplest, because there's actually, even though Georgetown has it, and we do have an online presence in some significant areas, especially our nursing school, but we're a little bit new to in some ways to the distance education world, but that's been around for a long time. There's a lot of expertise about that, resources on which to draw. So there's something new about that for us, but in some ways that's not the part that's really the challenging part. So let's go to open. So one of the things about teaching in a traditional classroom setting is you get to make, especially at Georgetown, quite a few assumptions about who you're talking to. So when I'm in a classroom at Georgetown, I can assume, yeah, they're probably between 18 to 22 years old, quite bright, excellent command of English. They've all had a certain level of high school education, some AP courses. That's a lot to be able to assume about your audience. The fact that a MOOC is open, that anybody can enroll from any background, people with MDs, PhDs, 12-year-olds, anybody can enroll in this class, makes an extraordinarily challenging thing to do, because you really have to put your minds in sort of through the eyes of the learner. What might they know? What might they not know? How can we help them figure out what they don't know and find the resources that they would need to know? It's extraordinarily challenging. The last one, the M, the massive. This one I think is perhaps, Kelly can speak to this too, perhaps the biggest challenge of all. The fact that the courses are massive means that there are problems of scale that cause lots of technological difficulties, but they also cause a lot of difficulties just in terms of trying to figure out what we're doing. Because when we stand in front of a classroom with students in front of us, we can look at their faces and be like, okay, 3/4 of them are asleep, it's time to do something else, right? Or these people look confused. There's a lot of sort of back and forth. And of course, we don't have that in quite that format in the massive course. And so there's definitely some challenges around that, and a lot of things that we're learning. So the challenges are pretty significant. But let me just then say something quickly about the opportunities and then hand it over to my colleague Kelly. So one of the things, as I said, when I was first asked to do the MOOC, I was like, really? Do I want to do this? But as with many things, I said, what the heck, I'll just give it a shot. I have never, I think in my life, had to think so much about what I'm doing when I'm teaching as I have in the conversations that we have about our MOOC. Because we can't take much for granted. All of our usual strategies and things don't necessarily apply. It's very easy to get into a rut as a college professor, even if you're teaching a class. And I teach a brick and mortar version of our bioethics class. It's different because the syllabus is different, but something very similar. You just do the same thing that you've been doing. But that doesn't work here. You're forced to sort of rethink everything that you're doing. And it certainly doesn't mean in my case that I'm just going to radically transform everything I do in my traditional classroom. In fact, working on the MOOC helps me appreciate some of the things that I have in that classroom environment and try to make the most of them. But what it does is make me constantly think as a teacher, am I doing this the best way I can? What are the other ways in which I could get students to learn this information? Would it be better for me to videotape myself doing this and have them watch that and discuss it in class? Maybe. There's all kinds of sort of radically new ways of thinking about what you're doing in a MOOC that you have to think about when you're doing a MOOC that for me have been extraordinarily interesting and fruitful in rethinking what I'm doing in that traditional classroom space. And so I think it's a really exciting opportunity for faculty to sort of move out of that rut that we often find ourselves in and do what the early Jesuits did as well and just say, you know what? We don't really know what we're doing, but we'll give it a shot. The early Jesuits were adventurers, and I think if there's one thing that's definitely true about MOOCs is it's an adventure, it's an educational adventure, and we don't necessarily know how it will turn out, but I think it's a really good thing for us to be doing, and I'm really excited about what we're doing, and I'm really excited to hear about what Rosie's team is doing too. And so hopefully we'll have a good conversation about all of those things. Thank you.
timer going so I don't keep you all pinned here forever and way overstay my welcome. So, oh, is it not close enough? Better? Can we hear me? Yeah? Hi. So my name is Kelly Hewer. As you know, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics here on campus. And so working there with Karen and a variety of other faculty, graduate students, undergraduates, who are all coming together for the production of this MOOC. It absolutely does take a village. And some of the lessons that Karen was just describing about how reflective about our own teaching and pedagogy for those of us who are part of the team who have done a lot of teaching in the past has forced us to be, I think is really, has fed really nicely into the design process. So I want to talk a little bit more about our MOOC in particular, just to get granular on some of those lessons that we've learned, seeing certain challenges, how we're trying to turn those into opportunities to capitalize on the massive open and online nature of the course, and not just see the ways in which departure from a traditional brick and mortar setting feels like a threat to those of us who are very comfortable in that context and are very used to making certain kinds of choices about how we organize the flow of information, how we interact with students, how we make use of a variety of resources on campus, and so on, much of which is not available to us. Again, with the M and the O of the MOOC. So one thing we noticed right away is that the infrastructure of the university solves a lot of pedagogical problems for us. It's built in. We have libraries on campus. We have research support staff at those libraries. We have amazing researchers and information specialists who can help guide us and our students to resources that already exist. They can be checked out. All you need to do is be a member of the university. You can access those for free. Resource management and pedagogical resource acquisition and surfacing and curation has been an enormous challenge for most of the MOOCs. I'm sure many of you actually with the background and support for the libraries have been exposed to this. When I first went up to Cambridge, Massachusetts to the edX headquarters to get trained, I'm all excited. I was geeking out on the platform. I learned all the technology. You know, here I am. I'm supposed to be helping to do instructional design and also platform management. I was shocked. The first open session we had was with people who were part of MOOC design teams from a number of different universities, Boston University, or Boston College, I can't remember actually, a bunch who had just joined the consortium. 90% of the questions that were asked in that first open session, which was just a free-for-all, were about copyright. Difficulty that we face in trying to design a curriculum without knowing what kind of information we're going to have access to give to our students. So when you think about the kinds of pedagogical materials you can use to be teaching students, we're looking at a bioethics course, so it's interdisciplinary. We often draw from a variety of different sources, from law, from medicine, from theology, and of course from philosophy is absolutely our emphasis at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. Usually we do that by drawing things from books and from journals. Occasionally we'll be looking at online government resources that are free and open already, but most of this stuff is copyright protected. And so we face a choice. Do we engage in a very what could be a very protracted and incredibly legally complicated, because we're all making up these rules as we go, at the fringes of information management and intellectual property. Do we engage in trying to obtain the right to use a lot of these resources from people who are very confused about what MOOCs are anyway? Or do we try and find information that's already available online or that we can place online without breaking any rules or stealing anybody's intellectual property, so that we can know how to build a curriculum around those resources? So one of the things that we've worked very hard to do is to utilize the strength of some of the librarians at the Bioethics Research Library, which coordinates very closely with the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, and also some consults with Lowinger, and our contacts up at edX who are in contact with the members of the edX Library Consortium about strategies here. What can we do? Is it best to speak first to faculty and say, all right, Professor Veach, when you're teaching about physician-assisted suicide, what articles do you assign? What do you have students look at? Do you have them look at other people's advanced directives? Is there this particular article you always do? And then take that one step back that Karen was mentioning before, as we do about so many choices we make in the classroom that we can't make in the MOOC context. Why do you use that article? What's good about it? Because we may not have that article, and we may not be able to ask students to read it because we're looking at a broad array of demographics in the class, and we can't assume excellent English language competency or that we've been able to train them philosophically, or more to the point, that we're going to have the rights to use that. Why do you do that? What's important about that? Are you looking at philosophical acumen there? Is there a list, is it a really good grounding in certain kinds of details about the legal facts that we may be able to get elsewhere? And then in combining the pedagogical expertise of the faculty with the informational expertise that the librarians can provide, you can be very creative about trying to seek out and find other repositories of information that we can use. And once we know we have them in hand, we know we can count on students having access to the information in that way and be able to design a curriculum around it. But it's been an absolute adventure, and so much the better. Hats off to Rosie's team for being able to do so much so quickly when you really didn't have the option of engaging in these longer copyright chasing exercises. So we're trying to do a hybrid of many different ways of acquiring information that we know we can rely on to give to our students. But that's just one example. There are many other aspects in our course where we're stopping and looking and saying, all right, I've taught bioethics courses before, I've taught philosophy courses before, and I have a kind of intuitive sense, not only of what I can rely on the university and the library context to be able to provide me with for the students, but also I have a sense this topic, students really struggle with this topic, and so it's best for me if I have 20 minutes of lecture, a small group discussion. This topic went well last time I taught it, and I know I'm going to want to have open office hours in these 3 ways. Now, having 20 minutes of uninterrupted lecture, you cannot do on the MOOC platform. Having a small group discussion in a way that, say I want to stimulate civil discourse among my students, it's very difficult to understand how you model that in a massive open or online context. Office hours is, again, something that's a challenge. And so, again, we have to take that step back. What's the actual value? When I feel I have a sense of how to teach a particular topic, or other faculty members do, and they share that with me, we have to step back and say why, because we're building something very dissimilar. Our course is a 6-week introduction to bioethics. It's modular, so it begins with an introduction. It's that 6 weeks. Then you can tack on topic-specific modules of 4 weeks each. We're looking at one in clinical research ethics, possibly one in feminism and bioethics, or genetics. So it's a very different way of conceptualizing what introducing somebody new to bioethics would even involve. We're natively designing it for the platform, and so we're trying to bear in mind all of these things, not just what the heck are we going to give people to read or to watch, or do we have access to documentaries, what images or graphs can we provide for them, but also what kinds of interactions and assessments can we provide for students? How are we going to be able to gauge people's understanding of really rich, thick, complex, often contentious topics? It can be very easy, well, I shouldn't say that, it can be very difficult to keep things civil in a course like bioethics, where we're talking about abortion, we're talking about euthanasia, we're talking about a lot of sensitive issues where many people will have had personal experience in their own past with elder care. Opinions can be very forceful and emotions can run high. It's not always easy to moderate that in the classroom, but it's a lot easier, we speculate, in a small group where you have face-to-face contact with people and you can build trust over time and make the space for those kinds of conversations. How on earth do you do that when the only contact you have with your peers in a course in the MOOC is mediated by a glowing screen and they're reduced to a little username? How can we try and understand what's important about those conversations and import that back to the platform? So natively designing for the platform is something we are trying to bake in. We're moving from our own experience has always been with teaching 13-week introductory courses, because that's the semester length here at Georgetown. This is really different. And we're also team teaching the course, which provides another layer of challenge. As we've learned so much from talking to Rosie and a lot of the other, and a lot of people at Candles as well on campus who have been an enormous support to us in terms of instructional design. But there's a learning curve for faculty, just in terms of camera comfort. And then, of course, in terms of really thinking pedagogically, how is what I'm doing really dissimilar from everything that I've done for my entire career teaching students? We get to do that 7 times because we have 7 faculty members. And we're also dealing with a multiplicity of teaching styles. So that's one of the wonderful things about the great lineup that we have at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, a wide array of bioethics scholars and educators. But there's a real challenge about understanding, again, 7 times. Well, what is it? Karen, as you just saw, is a phenomenal presenter, super engaging. We need to make sure that that translates to when you're just watching her in 7-minute snippets in an online context where she's interspersed with other people. Some people write a lot, and it's that they're like itchy if they don't have something in their hands. I'm kind of like this, so like I'm a little itchy right now. I kind of want to be writing this up on a whiteboard behind me, but I have to talk into the microphone like this. We want to be able to utilize that without imposing it on other people who are very comfortable standing at a podium and presenting like that. We want to learn what makes their teaching styles effective. How do they connect to students, and how can we backward design from when we're talking about importing some of that expertise to the online content? Again, 7 times. So there are enormous opportunities that I think we can see as the flip side of some of these challenges. Just in closing, you might have concerns. I was highlighting a number of them before. How do we ensure civil discourse and real learning takes place around contentious issues? One of the most important things we try to do in philosophy courses, especially applied ethics courses like a bioethics course, is to model civil discourse across difference among and between our faculty, and so this is a great opportunity to do that. We can showcase a number of different conversations. We also try and make sure it happens between and among our students. And one of the best things I think many of us can think back to our own early learning experiences is learning from other people in the class, hearing them wrestle with an issue, hearing them raise a question you wouldn't have thought of, or hearing one of their personal experiences with something, even if it's very sensitive, that you were talking about. How much greater is that opportunity when you'll have something in common now, being signed up for this MOOC with somebody literally on the other side of the globe, with whom you might have almost nothing else in common, to be able to find points of commonality. That's a tremendous benefit. And there can be something probably also as well liberating about anonymity in online contexts. We've seen that as well. So you want to try and look at some of the challenges I've been identifying. They can feel staggering when you line them all up like this, but a lot of them have an obverse, which is we are, as I was saying about the copyright voyages, making some of this up as we go along. It's iterative. We're learning from mistakes and from failures, but it's also a tremendous opportunity because we are, in a sense, inventing the next wave in higher education. And the fact that we here at Georgetown, in a partnership with a not-for-profit like edX, have the capacity to touch so many more people than we do just here on campus is something I think we're all really excited about. So I want to turn this over to Rosie, who's going to I think, dazzle everybody with their the tales from the MOOC that's already launched. It's great so far. Thank you.
We're going to switch timers here. So thank you for welcoming me. I know I'm a add-in here to the program, but we have a really wonderful opportunity to share with you some of the experiences that we're already going through in the launch of the first Georgetown MOOC. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to kind of jump you right into use of technology, and then we'll cut that off, and believe we go into Q&A. So you're going to bear with me here for a few minutes as we begin this launch. And one of the things that I want to point out is that one of the miracles of having this opportunity to be the first MOOC is, in fact, the not knowing. Let me just start here from the beginning. All right, here we go. We were shocked. We were shocked when we realized how many people were interested in being part of this experience. Much like my colleagues already pointed out, our personal motivation was to respond to a call for proposals to a grand experiment. Initially, it wasn't really the call to the MOOC, but rather a call to integrating technology in our teaching and in the way that we engage our students. The MOOC was the far end of the spectrum. So we were looking for proposals that included everything from the use of iPads, how we might integrate even something as simple as a PowerPoint in our teaching. I have a professor in our program that for the first 20 plus years of his teaching only used overheads. That was his comfort zone. He knew how to write on the overhead and how to translate that. But the students of new generations came through and started saying, overheads? What is that machine? It's a little bit like calling something the mimeograph machine, right? So I had to ask one of my younger students to please help him and to move to the PowerPoint generation. That was really a great transition, and our students loved it. He loved it. He found way more opportunity in his ability to teach. So our motivation, we were called for the proposal, was to say, how do we engage in this? Well, I have got this vast array of wonderful alumni coming out of the Landegger program. These are individuals that have self-sorted themselves over the years into an honors program that helps them train at the intersection of international business and public policy. And they're all over the world in many different businesses, public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector. Over time, I used the new business networking platform of LinkedIn to build a very robust group of alumni. And my original proposal was really written to create what I was going to call the Landegger Lecture Series, in air quotes, that I would offer my alum as a formative engagement. Some of them didn't have a chance to see our director in action in class, just because they ran out of time when they were here at Georgetown. So that was my original motivation. And then came the consortium and edX and the MOOCs. So in the evaluation process, we were asked to participate and to rewrite our proposal to go to MOOC status. So MOOC status, again, the MOOC, we were still trying to get comfortable with that word in our mouth, right? MOOC, what is this? So the MOOC turned out, as Kelly pointed out, to be a complete rewrite of our experience here at Georgetown. So these are some course details. So what does our MOOC look like when you come into the edX experience? First of all, it's Georgetown X. And I want to be clear about that, because one of the interesting things about the MOOC is that while we own all the content that's in the MOOC, the students in the MOOC are not Georgetown students. So that's a very important distinction, because it makes a difference on how we set our expectations around learning and engagement. And so there's this first tension. How do we balance what we expect our students to do, how we expect them to comport themselves, to behave in this online space, with what other cultures expect, what their own individual settings expect? So Georgetown X, a very important definer. This particular course is based on 2 SFS Landegger program courses that our director teaches. One is the Globalization Challenges course for developed and developing countries, and the other course is a very popular business and investment negotiations for developing countries. It is a 7-week asynchronous course, so unlike the 13, 14-week delivery of the full engagement, multiple hours, 3 hours a week in the classroom, this is a course that is available to the student population to be taken at their own pace over the period of time of the offering. The live dates, October 1 to November 26. These are the dates that the course will run with content and with open platform, what we call discussion boards for student engagement. This is when students can compete for, move toward, a certificate of completion. Now, there was a great battle at the initial days of the MOOC award around what the certificate would be. And our edX platform colleagues were absolutely certain that what they wanted to award their students was a certificate of mastery. Well, there was no way we were going to agree with a certificate of mastery. We could not possibly know who was actually doing the work, was knowledge being acquired to the point of proficiency, what would this mean? And so one of the challenges that we faced very early on, and we debated and debated up until about 2 weeks before the launch of the course, was what the certificate was going to be. We felt very uncomfortable with the whole bait and switch, that we would invite them to get a certificate of mastery, but really what we were going to give them is a certificate of completion, because that's really the best that we could do in terms of the assessment side, given the massive level of this course. However, we did want to have the course available longer term, and so in addition to it being live over the course of these next several weeks, where we peel each week of content off week to week, we also wanted to make sure that we were learning from the platform. There was an opportunity for exchange of information, but then allow students that wanted to self-pace over a longer period of time that opportunity. So this particular course, and I invite all of you to sign up, will be archived through May 2014, so through the end of this academic year. And there are challenges that are posed with that, with the expectation that perhaps next year we might freshen up the course to launch again, based again on the data that we get in this first round. So what does it include? It includes readings, it includes lecture videos, it includes a discussion board, a student wiki. How many of you are familiar with the wiki concept? All right, great. So the wiki concept, for those of you that are new to this, is fairly simple, but it is a space where the students on this particular course can self-author articles. Now, we give them prompts week to week in terms of content, but we expect the students to just get in there and engage. We had no idea what was going to happen, and we were shocked at the level of engagement on the course wiki. That, to me, has been one of the most rewarding aspects of this course. Self-paced, we told everybody to expect to put in between 5 and 8 hours of effort per week. We wanted to give them a certificate signed by the professor, note, not signed by Georgetown University, very important, and then archived through May 14. So I'm going to play for you the teaser video, the video that a student would see if they sign up on edX to make a choice whether to take this course or another course. So this is going to launch us into the actual online platform. And while it's opening up, I will tell you that our student body is very diverse, not only from the perspective of the globe, but in terms of our age groups. We have students from the teenage age group all the way through the 70s and the 80s. And they're all very engaged in very different ways, and I'll share that information. So this is the opening page on edX, and we're going to watch the largest Dr. Moran that you've ever seen on this screen.
My name is Ted Moran, and our course is Globalization's Winners and Losers, Challenges for Developed and Developing Countries. We are going to deal with some of the most controversial issues surrounding the spread of trade, technology, and investment. We begin, for example, with the resource curse. Foreign direct investment in oil and natural gas. We move to sweatshop issues, issues of corruption, issues of authoritarian rule. We look at the more promising area of globalization of industry in the developing world and building of supply chains. But then we turn that on its head and ask, does this come at the expense of the developed world? What is the cause of the US trade deficit? Does the outsourcing of jobs to India threaten workers in the United States? Is China becoming an economic superpower? We will investigate all of these issues and come to conclusions that require policy responses. And here's the surprise. Unlike everybody else in Washington, we're going to figure out how to pay for them. I welcome you to the Georgetown campus. There are no prerequisites for this course, no math required. I'm Ted Moran, and this is Globalization's Winners and Losers, Challenges for Developed and Developing Countries.
All right, so that's Ted. And he apologizes, by the way, for not being able to be here. So this is an example of what a student might come in to the edX platform and say, wow, do I want to take this course? This seems really compelling to me. I'm studying in this field. I'm just generally curious about this opportunity. So that's the first thing that they'll see. So quickly running through some additional slides here. Thank you. Motivation. So much like my colleagues, our number one motivation was we're part of Georgetown. We are all about engaging the world in education. We wanted to challenge some conventions and consider new teaching and learning models. We wanted to talk about the possibility of a flipped classroom here on the Georgetown campus, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later. How we enhance our teaching using technology. What about distance teaching? How can we engage our alumni and other GU stakeholders, which was my original intent in writing the proposal. And then, of course, the wonderful opportunity for researching learning about learning. We started this particular course as what I would call Generation 1 MOOC, and Generation 1 was a back of the classroom video camera setup, and that was it. And you just videotaped yourself lecturing and speaking to your classroom. And you can imagine sitting through 40 hours of raw footage. It was just not very appealing, not very compelling, not something that was interesting enough for students to retain their interest. So we set up this experiment. We actually did that back of the classroom video capture. We looked at the results. We asked questions about, does the videotaping itself, is that disruptive to the professor, to the student body? Do we actually have a product? Is there a value here? Can this be a transformative effort? The professor teaching this course, by the way, has been teaching for 30-plus years in this program. He has been director of the program off and on since its inception back in 1979. And so this was an individual who is very comfortable in a Socratic setting, speaking directly with students and engaging in debate and conversation in the classroom. No technology used in his sessions, by the way. The surprise was that we needed a complete curriculum redesign, which is something that Kelly pointed out. The first thing was, how do we compress this course, this very popular course, into a 7-week online offering? We determined that we had to figure out what the new classroom environment would look like. What would be the class dynamics? We looked at lecture formats, master classes, and guest speakers, and now all 3 of these components are embedded in the lecture videos in the course. We had to rethink and rewrite the content and engage general and diverse global audience members, as opposed to, as Karen pointed out, the type of student that she might see in a classroom on any given day here on the Georgetown campus. Rewriting assessments to fit the platform and to drive the learning goals that we wanted. This has been quite a task, in part because no one's really ever done it. And it is very different in the humanities and in the social sciences to write these types of assessments as compared to our peers, for example, that are doing this work in the type of courses that require more of a technical assessment, where you can create very clear ability to have a rubric and assess. Very different in our environment. Writing content scripts to guide our production. We learned very quickly that you cannot just wing it, and that we have to rewrite the script and try to stay on task in order to create a well-produced presentation. We included other SFS faculty and guests as lecturers. We learned that building the MOOC team was absolutely critical, and you'll see here, this is where a lot of cross-campus collaboration took place, which is what Kelly again was pointing out. The content happened within the program, within the Landegger program. Our director, myself, our lead TA, one of my graduate assistants. The video production happened in combination of library resources with the wonderful Gillard and Barrington Baines really helping me from the first day of this project, through the Candles environment and the great videography team that we have there. Designing the course and the architecture of the course involved both the content specialists and our Center for New Design and Learning and Scholarship team, the researchers that were going to help us articulate the course. The platform team, which included our edX partner colleagues and, again, our Candles team. I put copyright and permissions, but we'll see in 2 more slides a much, much further engagement from the library. But it was the Lowinger experience that staff along with the Landegger program. All right, MOOC and library support. This was really interesting. I mean, we truly had to create something out of nothing. We had no idea what we were doing. We were learning as we went along. And the thing that kept us together was that we were all on the same page. We were all ready to experiment. So where we saw great library support, and we expect that this is going to be a very much of an ongoing effort, is first of all in advising and training MOOC faculty and teams. You know, we come from different experiences. What is involved here? Copyright issues and negotiating publisher permissions was a massive undertaking. I mean, I cannot tell you how many hours. What was really fascinating is to see how far the publishers are in this, which is really not very. So if you were to see what our permissions look like for this particular course, fairly economical permission fees on the one hand. Some didn't charge us anything at all, but it's everything from a random email to a formal letter with an invoice number. I mean, really all over the map. So the publishers are learning as well. Issues on advising and training on information literacy. How do we support and train these teams on what information is out there? Guidance and support toward open access materials. Again, our professors know what they know, they teach with the resources that they teach with, and they don't have to negotiate this for the Georgetown classroom. Very different experience, very time consuming. Teaching about teaching in the online environment itself. How do we integrate that technology? This is something we just discovered this week. The quality issues of converting files for accessibility on these technical platforms. It's really hard when a publisher tells you, you have permission to use this document, but you have to use it in a very low resolution, in a very, you could only be a PDF. Wait, I think I have a copy of a page there for you to see what I'm talking about. And I wonder to myself, how are my students dealing with these readings elsewhere around the world? The library's important influence in institutional policies. What do we do about intellectual property? How do we think about content licensing? They'll have great import in that information area. Building teams to support online learners and MOOC developers. Human capital. I mean, there are people hours invested here, and what we have found is that we've layered work on top of people that already have a full plate. That's true for us, and it's true for all our peers in the MOOC. Within our particular MOOC, we have 45 open source assets, news articles, websites, open journals, multimedia assets in video, music, and images. We have 7 closed source assets within books, particularly coming from Peterson Institute, Yale, Stanford, Pearson, Edward Elgar, and Brookings. We have attributions from videos and songs and images embedded throughout the experience of the MOOC. Questions about archiving is still open-ended. We don't know what's going to happen with that yet. We're moving in that direction as we go through it. What were some of the big challenges that we had to overcome? Well, for one thing, we only had 5 months to put this thing together. We had no idea what that actually meant. We thought we had all the time in the world. We didn't. Everything had to move simultaneously. Those of you who have been in the business environment, you can imagine starting with a project from zero and moving all the pieces together at the same time. I have a daughter who's a classical musician. It was a bit like writing a score all at once. You had to conceptualize everything together, and you had to develop best practices as you went along. We had to figure it out together as a team. I mentioned copyrights already on readings and images. Managing the edX relationship in and of itself is quite challenging. Fabulous people, incredibly well motivated. The mission is fantastic, tremendous nonprofit, but it's a startup. It's a startup experience. There's changing in the human capital within that startup, so much so that we are definitely the constant in the team, and they are moving resources. So re-educating new people on the team was very critical. The platform is evolving. Today, we spent 3 hours trying to figure out how the algorithm in the background matches the scoring for our students around the world. Aligning university resources, quite challenging in this very short period of time. And by the way, it was summer, so people are on vacation. But who do we begin to call? We were really at a loss there. But moving forward, team dynamics. This is what made this MOOC successful. It was all about how this team gelled. Trust and respect. Everybody had very defined roles, and we had to count on everybody producing at a high quality at every moment in time. Uncompromising on quality of both the content in the course and on the production of the course. Being flexible and adaptable. Things happen. The technology doesn't work the way you want it. You have to make some changes. Being creative, having a positive attitude, focusing on being responsive, having a very clear collaborative approach, an enormous quantity of coffee and humor. This is a short video, about a minute, that was offered to the Board of Regents a few weeks ago when the course first launched.
All of this is a pulse. Every day, all day, they have to improve. They have to imitate. They have to innovate. The competition here is intense. The name of our course is Globalization's Winners and Losers, Challenges for Developed and Developing Countries. We begin with some of the most controversial areas in the developing world. And we let you, all 20,000 of you, grapple with what constitutes exploitation. And indeed, you let us know, and we enter into debates on how to define exploitation. This is a segue into focusing on the developed world, because we ask, does this industrialization of the developing world come at the expense of workers and firms in the developed world? What are the causes of the U.S. trade deficit? Is China becoming an economic superpower? What about outsourcing to India? What is causing wage stagnation and wage disparities in the United States? To what extent is globalization to blame? So I welcome you to the Georgetown campus. We are going to be participating together for 7 intense weeks. Let's get to work.
All right, these are just some photos of the lecture setup in beautiful Healy classroom, guest professor talking about the GDP equation, a masterclass setting. This is a fun slide. This is MOOC by the numbers. This is as of today. So we have 31,474 people enrolled. That number keeps growing every day. I think that's an amazing number. But what really blows me away is the number of countries represented. We have 205 countries in the world, and well over 150 are represented in the student group. It's really stunning. On an average week, we might have about 5,300 students engaged in the week. Again, this is going to be archived through May 14. We're still getting data behind this. We have 328 articles already posted and self-authored by our students in the wiki. Our team consisted of 44 individuals, faculty, TAs, students, our Candles team, our Lowinger staff, and this is a low number, but I would say there were at least 8,000 man-hours put into this by our calculation in the months of production. So this is an amazing outpouring of interest in the MOOC, and there's data that's going to come behind it. You saw some of these slides in the video. I'm going to quickly go through here. Let me just show you this. This is a very interesting new piece of technology on the platform. It's a new digital textbook. So I can't activate the textbook here, but basically what happens is when we get permissions on particular readings, we have to comply again with the resolution requirements by the various publishers. And what this technology allows us to do is to scan and load these pages. So in the active website, you can actually click on an arrow that will paginate and it'll kind of flip the thing. So it was very, very interesting. All right. And then future perspective. Again, we're just learning. We don't believe that the MOOC is ever going to replace the classroom experience. It is a very different. Digital textbooks for global instructors. We've already been asked by instructors around the world to use the MOOC as a digital textbook from Kazakhstan, from Africa, other places. And for us, the evolution of this really being ability to offer degrees and certificates is going to come from how we see the technology evolving around student verification and assessments, which is really the measure by which we can say, have they acquired the knowledge? So I'll stop there. I know there's lots of Q&As.
Our speakers have agreed to take questions from the audience. We have microphones over there. If you'd like to ask a question, Kelly, Karen, Rosie, if you would come here and I'll hand you a mic and speak into it, please. Happy to have you ask questions. Yes.
Hello. Thanks. Really interesting topic. So let me preface my comments by saying I think MOOCs are great, and I was looking at the MIT course a few weeks ago, catalog, and there's tons I'd love to take. I don't have time probably, but I'd love to take it. But here's my bigger question. So I keep thinking to myself, if I was the CEO of a corporation or president of a university, and my product, in this case education, was extraordinarily expensive, tuition, I would be viewing this as a disruptive technology, and like, is this going to put me out of business? Is it going to change? Is this going to cannibalize my core business, my product, or not? And I guess I'm just kind of curious about that. Is there a business model here, and how's it going to impact the legacy business model? I hate to say, but you know, any thoughts on that? Thanks.
So there's a couple of questions. One is that are MOOCs ever going to recoup the investment, and if so, how? I'm going to pass on that one and address the second one about whether this is really disruptive and whether institutions should be worried, because that is a real fear, and I think it's less of a fear for an institution like Georgetown, which can probably fill every seat in its classrooms no matter what, and more for institutions that perhaps are already kind of struggling to survive and that worry, like, wow, if people can just take a MOOC and get credit for it, why do they need us? And I actually think that's a fair question. I mean, I think it's actually a question to which universities and colleges should be prepared to respond. Yeah, why do they need us? What am I doing? Like, how am I helping? But I'm actually really confident. In fact, the more I work on the MOOC, the more confident I am that there's a good answer for that, at least for my courses. I can't speak to like a computer science course or electrical engineering course, but I think in philosophy and in disciplines that are writing intensive, there is something that we're doing, and I'm more convinced of it than ever, actually, that interactive experience that students get is worth something. Is it worth Georgetown's tuition? I don't know. I'll find out when my kids get to college age and see what I think then. But is it worth something? Is there something that they get in the classroom and that interaction that they can't get in a MOOC? Absolutely. So in that sense, I don't think that they're ever going to, possibly because you've seen what it takes to put them on. I just don't see any institution putting on tens of thousands because there's just not enough time to do that. So in that sense, it doesn't worry me that much. But I think it's a legitimate question and a legitimate concern.
I would agree with that. Is this working? Okay. I would agree with that in that we have discovered that it is not a replacement for the classroom experience. It is a way of, in our case, fomenting debate, engaging students that otherwise couldn't be part of this conversation. You didn't get to see some of the discussion boards. I feel that our work is worth it when that young mother who's a banker in a country in Africa wants to educate herself better so that she can do her job better. Or an individual from Pakistan is trying to set up his study group with the gentleman from India and the young woman from somewhere else. So that there are elements of it that I think have a value. I'm not sure that I could put a dollar on it because it's so important to what we're trying to do as a mission as educators. On the other hand, there are opportunities, I think, for business models. Those are now being explored. Currently on edX, the certificates are free, but even edX is talking about what is the next wave here. Can we charge a fee for a certificate? I will tell you that in this the population that's taking this MOOC is a very highly educated group. The majority have undergraduate degrees at a minimum. Several have graduate degrees. I would say the vast majority want the certificate, many of them for professional development. So I could see an environment where we create content that companies themselves might purchase as a Georgetown X product that they use then for in-house training. Absolutely something that's doable. And with regard to, is it changing what we do? My experience is I've worked over 16 years in public education in Virginia, and I'm on the NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College board right now, and one of the things that we're struggling with is that as of, I believe, next year, every student K-12 is going to come out with one online learning experience. So the students of the future are going to expect to see technology in some way, shape, or form. And so we need to figure out how we set ourselves up to be efficient in the use of our technology and to provide that type of service. But it will not replace the traditional classroom. It will be part of our teaching.
I'm going to add a little something. There are two dimensions to your business model. One is, of course, financial, and the university has invested significant resources for infrastructure, for program and course development, as well as for joining edX itself. Harvard and MIT alone each contributed $30 million to establish the edX platform, so this is not a trivial undertaking. But there is another dimension to all of this. Maybe 15 years ago or so, the faculty members in some of the sciences at MIT decided to put their course syllabi online and accessible to the entire world. And a number of people thought that people had gone crazy at MIT, that they were giving away their intellectual capital, that the course syllabi were things that people would adopt and no one would ever want to go to MIT again. That didn't happen. But the aspect of giving away a university's intellectual capital is a very real aspect of the consideration of the business model. In our case, from Kazakhstan, a professor wants to take Ted Moran's MOOC and use it as a teaching model, use it to teach in Kazakhstan. Perhaps that can be a monetized asset. We're not going to give things away, but on the other hand, if you remember our Jesuit mission, Jesuits at the margins, Jesuits helping people, Jesuits from the 16th century going and teaching around the world. All of these things fit very much our mission. So is it a grand experiment? Absolutely. Will it be the disruptive, permanent technology that's the killer app? Who knows? Other questions?
One of the problems always is that we put things off. And therefore, the self-paced courses always lose out to paced courses. How are you going to overcome that?
Good question.
Oh, it is. I think that's a phenomenal question. This is something that we debated a little bit. The standard on edX, I think for a while it was the only thing you could do on the platform. I don't know if they've moved away from this or not. I know they were considering it. The standard was you had courses that were always launched 1 week at a time. And so there are great benefits to this. What they're doing in the globalization course is having a weekly office hours, kind of like a fireside chat, but it's a screen side chat, where student questions that have surfaced throughout the week. I'm speculating a little bit because this is our plan, but I know that there's the office hour aspect. Anyway, student questions that arise throughout the week are then addressed, and that's posted online, and so you're able to have this real-time feeling that your question might be answered by the professor. You're getting to learn from other questions that are being asked at the same time. That's an experience you have by marching through the course at the same time and developing a cohort and a sense of community around the course. That can be very important. But if you're interested in MOOCs, I very much recommend a blog called Degree of Freedom that's being written. Maybe some of you are familiar with this. Somebody who is trying to do a one-year BA by taking a rough equivalent of an entire college education's worth of MOOC courses over the course of a year. And he just published this really interesting post addressing exactly this issue and saying, gosh, I've noticed I've fallen really behind in 2 of my classes. And wouldn't you know it, they're the ones that all of the content is available already. There is no cohort pulling you forward, and there's nothing you feel you've missed out on by failing to be engaged during a particular week. And so I thought that was fascinating because I think there can be a tendency to think, well, the ideal should be that you allow people to be self-paced and you're going to get so much more engagement that way. There's more flexibility, it's easier to archive, et cetera, et cetera. And yet the learner experience for this person, I think some of us can identify with that feeling. His experience was that the non-self-paced courses where he felt bad if he missed a week and he missed out on stuff were much more effective at keeping him engaged.
Part of your answer involves this question of the cohort, which sounds to me like a marvelous idea. How deep is that cohort idea embedded in what you're doing?
That's a great question. I think Karen wanted to follow up on something I said before. I assumed it just seemed like that, but I'll answer very quickly and then turn it over. So one thing that we've looked a lot at is the forum technology that exists on edX, and I know it's something that there are a lot of internal conversations they're having about that platform. There's an idea called micro-cohorting, where you, rather than having simply wide open discussion forums where anybody can post, you create smaller forums where the people who are allowed into them are limited. One thing that they found is, especially in courses with an enormous enrollment, is that if you had an open forum and we had to say, here's your discussion question for the week, physician-assisted suicide, yay or nay. I'm going to keep using that example apparently. Comments poured in at such a rate that everything was buried. You didn't actually get exchanges because what was at the top of the page just slid right off. So people weren't talking to one another, they were talking past one another, because they were just responding immediately to this prompt at the beginning. Micro-cohorting you can do in a number of different ways. You could do it by background, so we played with the idea, maybe we create cohorts where we know we have a lot of physicians who have enrolled. Maybe we put them all in a discussion forum and they can share expertise around that. Maybe you do it by time zone. And so you don't log on accidentally in a dead time of the day for your time zone where nobody's responding to anything, or your comments always slide to the bottom of the page because they're right before the deluge of when everybody on the Eastern Seaboard logs in. So the importance of creating cohorts, not just for this grander sense of community, but also for very serious logistical reasons about having genuine discussions, is something we are building into the courses, and I know that other courses have been struggling with, and edX is thinking very seriously about how they structure those discussion components.
One of the things that we're actively doing, I agree with Kelly, is we do have use of email. So one of the things that we try to do on a weekly basis is send an email to all of our students We give them updates on what's going on in the course. We encourage them. So we are doing weekly office hours, which is really fun. The professor picks the 5-10 topics that the TAs raise that are raised through the discussion boards. There is a mechanism in our discussion boards for what we call upvoting specific questions. So as a student submits a question, if other colleagues within the cohort like it, they upvote it so it kind of bubbles up to the top. We have programming within the system, so if you're watching a video and you put some lecture notes in there and you want to reflect on something, there are individual discussion boards that thread. So you actually could do a sort by votes, what are the most popular things, by particular themes in the comments. You could actually sort by individual student and see what that person has. There are people that organically become what are known as community TAs, individuals that really are engaged in the topic and know it well, and so other students begin to follow them. So that's been very interesting, but we prompt activity and engagement through that constant pinging of the student group.
So I am currently enrolled in 4 MOOCs, and I am currently behind on 4 MOOCs. So I, a college professor trying to put on a MOOC, am a slacker with MOOCs. But I'm not sure this is bad. So I think that you're absolutely right. MOOCs work best for the self-motivated learners. But I think one of the things, so being a college professor is a great job for a control freak, right? Because you get to have a lot of authority for that temporary space of time, make sure they've done the reading and kept them, up to speed, and penalize them if they turn their stuff in late and all that kind of stuff. And you can't really do that in a MOOC. And I'm not sure even if we could that we should. So there's a lot of sort of just giving up. We don't know how people are going to use this, and that's okay. So for instance, one of the MOOCs that I'm enrolled in is a science and cooking MOOC, a very popular one run out of Harvard. And one of the reasons I'm behind is because my 2 daughters, who are 11 and 8, think these videos are really fun. There's one on chocolate chip cookies, the science of chocolate chip cookies, that they want to watch. So I'm just sort of waiting for a time to do this, and that's fine with me, and that's probably fine with the science and cooking people. I'm sure they don't care. But there's a lot of ways that people might use this. And one of the things that's sort of challenging, but also liberating about MOOCs is just being open to that, to how different people are going to want to use this. And one of the things that we're learning is how different people are going to use this. But the question about the motivation, when we start thinking about whether MOOCs might be courses in the traditional sense, and in particular, whether they might bear credit, and whether institutions should ever accept them for credit, then that question becomes really pressing. And so I'm an ethicist, this is what I do, and so everything is an ethical question for me one way or the other. But I do think this is a serious issue for those of us putting on MOOCs and for Georgetown. Because if the concern is that MOOCs are going to be something that people can reach for to replace courses, maybe especially at community colleges or state institutions, for people who are already kind of on the margins of the educational sort of life, on the one hand, it's great because they're free, and free is really important in a world in which there are crushing student loan debts. On the other hand, those are often just the students who really need someone kind of watching them and sort of inviting them in and monitoring their progress. And there's some data that already sort of bears this out. And so I think one of the things that Georgetown as an institution has to do is kind of pay attention to what's happening with our MOOCs, sort of let go in some ways, but also make sure that they're consistent with how we understand what it is. The tricky thing about this, and this goes back to the question about business, is there's some sense in which education is a business, and some other sense in which it is not a business. The Catholic Jesuit tradition is to think of education as a human right, and to think of those of us who are educators as doing something that's a vocation. And although it helps to be able to pay the bills and keep the lights on. It's not just that, it's a moral enterprise. And we have to always be thinking of it that way. And I think part of it is this question about how are people using this? And is this something that's helping them, something that's expanding their horizons and helping them, or is it something that's sort of pulling them down? So I do think we have to attend to both the pragmatics of keeping people engaged and also whether it's an important aspect of it. But it's one of the many enormous challenges of the massive aspect of it.
One last quick question. If we did anything wrong tonight, it's not allowing enough time for conversation because these 3 women are so engaged, as you are. Kelly Hewer, Rosie O'Neill, for this, for me, fascinating presentation and showing that Georgetown isn't on the margins. We are in the midst of doing what the Jesuits did to educate the world globally. Thank you very, very much. Thank you once again to the Casey-McIlvane family for sponsoring this wonderful program. And let me remind you, for Library Associates, our next event is in November, Thursday, November 14th. We're inviting you to come to the student production of Hamlet on this campus. Special price for library associate members. Hope to see you then, and in the meantime, thank you once again for joining us tonight.